We light our chalice to mark the opening of our service. We light our chalice to celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to reaffirm the historic pledge of liberal religion that seeks justice and moves towards the resolution of equality. We light this chalice as a symbol of our support of one another in our mutual journey of spiritual growth.
Our reading this morning comes from the Quran, the Surah Al-Hujurat, or the private rooms. Believers, avoid making too many assumptions. Some assumptions are sinful. And do not spy on one another or speak ill of people behind their backs. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of your dead brother? No, you would hate it. So be mindful of God. God is ever relenting and most merciful. People, we created you all from a single man and a single woman and made you into races and tribes so that you should get to know one another. In God's eyes, the most honored of you are the ones who are most mindful of God. God is all-knowing, all-aware. You should get to know one another. I love that line. It demonstrates the necessity of human relationship and intentional community. Add to that the magnitude of its source, and it takes my breath away. The Quran, the text that Islamic thought traditionally holds to be not just the word of God, but God incarnate in the world, it's telling us, it's commanding us to know one another. Not only that, but the Quran, or God, is telling us that this command is the reason for diversity. This command is the reason why we are all so different. We were made into races and tribes so that we should get to know one another. We were made into races and tribes so that we could connect to something different from ourselves. And in connecting, not in spite, but because of our differences, we are exposed to new truths, new understandings and possibilities that allow us to imagine a new way of being. We come together, and through our differences, we create something new, something we could never envision or create on our own. My Islamic studies professor at Union poked fun at this line one day in class. She joked that anybody who does interfaith work has heard these words quoted ad nauseum by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And who can blame them? What better tool to have in your interfaith toolkit than a supposedly divine command that says difference is intentional and meant to be engaged? I'm adding one more voice to that enamored chorus simply by bringing these lines to you today. They deliver a message that can transcend traditions, and with their focus on the importance of human relationship, they can resonate with even the most stringent of atheists. These words, they give us hope in our ability to connect and to create. They paint a beautiful picture of human potential. But do we always live up to it? I think the answer to that question is found in the first half of today's reading, in the verse that comes just before that inspiring line. It too includes a divine command, but this one takes on an almost harsher tone. It's kind of a warning. Avoid making too many assumptions. Some assumptions are sinful. I cannot help but think that this verse, this warning, occurs just before the beautiful image of our interconnected purpose to serve as an honest backdrop. It is meant to paint a picture, not of human potential, but of human reality. This divine command seems to be acknowledging that what we are perhaps more likely to do when we encounter someone who is different from us, someone whom we may not understand. Think about our lesson today. How many times have we assumed something about what a person believes based on their political affiliation? How many times has someone acted prejudicially, hurtfully, or even fatally towards someone because of the way they are dressed, because of the accent above their name, because of the color of their skin? This line, this divine reminder to avoid making assumptions, it doesn't mean that it is our natural inclination to believe or act in ways that prevent us from knowing one another. But it recognizes that the temptation to do so, it exists. A temptation that we have developed because of the stereotypes and prejudices that are deeply embedded in our culture and have shaped us in ways that we are constantly striving to uncover and counter. Our potential is to create loving connections. Our purpose is to know one another and create something new together. But sometimes that cultural temptation to assume and separate, it distracts us from that possibility, and we behave in ways that can divide and harm. Do not spy on one another or speak ill of people behind their backs. This is a laudable command for sure. It hints at the values of trust and transparency. It encourages direct and compassionate communication. But it's one that I definitely struggle to follow. I'll be honest, it's a bit too easy for me to recall the times when I've given into an assuming, ill-speaking temptation rather than live up to my connective potential. I'm a little bit of a gossip. It's a bit too easy for me to recall moments when I've avoided someone because I have created an entire story in my head about who they might be based on one facet of their personality. They grill chicken instead of burgers. It's a bit too easy for me to say things like, "Damn Tea Party idiot," or "He's such a privileged white man," even though I have never met the person I am talking about. And I know that I've said things that immediately bring up internal feelings of regret when someone I knew did something that hurt me, and all I could do was covertly lash out in pain. I don't always live up to my potential to connect and understand, and whoever wrote this verse, God or otherwise, definitely knows that. And they call me out on it in a pretty colorful way. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of your dead brother? No, you would hate it. I thought I was receiving an apocalyptic warning about what goes on in hell when I first read those words. The first words out of my mouth after I saw them were, "Oh, that's not right." Interestingly enough, I think I was quite on point with that initial reaction. It was an instinctive resistance to a literal illustration of backbiting. More specifically, my response was an instinctive resistance to the idea of backbiting or speaking ill against someone like me, someone whom I knew, someone whom I loved. Whoever wrote this verse knew that I would not want to speak ill of the people that I love, that I would not want to assume anything negative about them. And so they asked me to consider another question. What makes the people I love worthy of a treatment different from the people whom I have not met? What makes the people I love worthy of a different treatment from the people I do not know? Why is it that the people who are like us get more compassion and respect than the people whose experience we don't necessarily share? These are questions that the divisive and polarizing discourse in our country encourages us to avoid. Our differences aren't seen as reminders to connect and grow. They're painted as signals that we must protect ourselves and prevent change. Just look at the way that immigration has played out in this country. Men, women, and especially children have been fleeing violence in their countries, violence that is the direct result of our own foreign policy and support of oppressive regimes for the sake of our own economic growth. They risk their lives to cross treacherous deserts and canyons, and many don't make it. Yet our country's dominant narrative claims that they are undocumented, that they are a drain on the system, that they bring violence, and we speak ill of them behind their backs. We claim it is for our personal and national security. But a closer look shows our concerns are only around certain borders. Our concerns are only around people who do not fit what our culture treats as the ideal. Our concern is around people whose skin is darker, who come from specific places. As I recently heard someone say, the way our dominant narrative speaks of undocumented immigrants, it is not just an issue of immigration, it is an issue of race. It is an issue of treating those whom we see as different, as less worthy of our compassion. On a more personal level, these questions about differential treatment are ones that I've gotten really good at avoiding in many aspects of my life. Relationships, work, and ironically, when it comes to my own efforts to promote social justice. Sometimes my willingness to extend compassion to others is reduced by narratives I have created about them. Facing these questions isn't easy. It is incredibly difficult to admit that I have fallen prey to that temptation to separate, to assume, and to even harm. These are not small questions, and any answers that we might come up with are probably not going to be easy. Like I said, a part of me really likes that narrative of the stereotyped Tea Party idiot. It gives me something to focus my frustration on when I see new and appalling instances of women's access to health care being reduced through those thinly veiled anti-abortion legislations. They give me a target for my anger when every day brings a new headline of one more black or brown life violently ended with no justice served. My assuming and polarizing narratives, they give me something to rally against when I see government budgets increase funds put towards militarization or building new prisons and cut what is spent on staffing our public schools. Being able to make assumptions about certain people or groups, like Tea Party members, having the power to say negative things about them because I have the luxury of not knowing their stories, I'll be honest, it gives me the fuel I want to keep fighting for social change, to continue in that uphill battle to end injustice. But that fuel, as effective as it might be, it's not what I need. In fact, that fuel is toxic. That fuel of assuming hatred, of generalized anger, as much as it energizes me to stay in the struggle with friends and neighbors, it depletes me of my ability to connect with new people who I do not know, people whose stories I create based on assumptions of what I think they believe, what I think they want, what I think they have experienced, people whose worth I attempt to diminish by using my assumptions to turn them into an enemy, whose worth I diminish by using caricatures and insults to otherize them as a mobilizing tool. And that's not true social justice. That's creating a target or an enemy. It's an act of exclusion, and if my vision as a person of faith is universal justice, then that fuel, it takes me further away from it. It prevents me from making the connections that feed my imagination, that promote my ability to find new ways of creating a just world for all. So if my assumptions and oppositional methods are not effective ways to bring about social change, then what can I do? What else am I called to do? Be mindful of God. God is ever relenting, most merciful. This instruction may sound escapist at first, asking us to turn our attention to God. And for those of us who may be non-theist or agnostic, it can sound like nothing more than a non-answer. But the instruction of be mindful of God is a complex and integral element of Islam. Within the Quran, the concept of mindfulness of God is known in Arabic as taqwa. Taqwa is a trait that every Muslim is called to maintain and maximize, and that every person, regardless of their particular faith tradition, is capable of manifesting. And taqwa's importance comes from its two dimensions: a vertical relationship between a person and the divine, and the horizontal relationships that occur between people themselves. It is grounded in an understanding that one's beliefs and one's actions are inseparable, and that to truly be people of faith, both need to exist. Now, this vertical dimension of taqwa shared between individuals and God or the divine, it is an acknowledgement of that which has created and sustains us, that which has given us the gift of life, the capacities of free will and reason, and the power to innately know beauty and love in our hearts. Within Islam, this vertical mindfulness, it's a grateful recognition that we are not the random result of chaos and luck, but the intended product of a source that through intricate and scientifically observable ways brought us into being to serve a particular purpose, that there is something beyond our individual selves and interests that we are here to engage, a sacred and divine will that we are meant to manifest. And it is this manifestation of a divine will that serves as the horizontal dimension of taqwa, grounded in our gratitude for the gifts we have received and the recognition of our purposeful existence. Our horizontal mindfulness is the active element of our faith. It is the embodiment of what the feminist Muslim scholar Amina Wadud calls our moral consciousness. It is not a call to withdraw from the world in our recognition of that creating and sustaining source or sources of our lives. Rather, it requires our perpetual and reverent engagement with all of humanity as purposeful creations, an awareness that we have all been created and sustained by the same sacred forces. That while we are all complex and diverse beings, no one group or person is more worthy than any other. That if anything or anyone in the world attempts to value our differences in a manner that deceives us into thinking that some are more important, more loved, or more capable of loving others, we must resist that temptation to go along with them. We must act to honor and restore our innate equality. This horizontal dimension of taqwa does not require people to observe a particular dogma or exclusive creed, but it does require us to act in ways that honor a belief in the innate worth and goodness of humankind, an innate worth and goodness within the people we know and within the people we do not know. Within Islam, this call to manifest taqwa is not a command to speak or behave compassionately to what is known as God. God doesn't need our compassion, but we do. All that is created needs our embodied mindfulness, needs our willingness to observe a divine will that we were meant to lovingly manifest. This command, be mindful of God, it tells us to speak and behave compassionately towards each other, to know one another in our divinely loved and diverse forms, even, or perhaps particularly, when our perception of those forms challenges our willingness to remain in relationship. Within the hadith, the sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, there is a story that lifts up the need to remain mindful of God and that command to speak and behave compassionately towards one another. And in exchange with some followers, Muhammad gives this advice: help your brother, whether he is an oppressed one or an oppressor. The people who hear this then respond with a question. It is all right to help him if he is oppressed, but how should we help him if he is an oppressor? Muhammad replied to them, by preventing him from oppressing others. This story is a reminder of that innate goodness that exists within every person. It is a reminder that we all possess a capacity to love, but sometimes we are tempted to act in ways that harm. And we need others to help us avoid that temptation to believe and act in harmful ways. We need others to help us to prevent our becoming oppressors. This prevention cannot happen if we assume we know a person's story and then distance ourselves from them because of what we think they believe. It can only happen if we choose to manifest a sense of taqwa that honors the worth and humanity of whom we might label oppressors, to strive to find new ways to be in relationship with the people we do not know, with whom we think we share no common ground. As Unitarian Universalists, we can learn from this Islamic concept of taqwa and live into our own understanding of a mindfulness of God. We're a theologically diverse faith community, and not everybody uses the word God. So we can manifest a richly diverse and inclusive mindfulness by striving to serve a greater moral purpose that goes beyond our individual selves. We can hold in our minds and our hearts an understanding that we come together as a gathered community, not as an act of self-service, but as a commitment to communal service. We do not elevate ourselves or our individual interests above anyone else, because to do so would take us further away from our sacred moral purpose of universal justice. Our universalism especially means that our efforts necessarily include those with whom we might vehemently disagree, those whom it is tempting to turn into an enemy rather than a companion or a partner. Being mindful means that we not only recognize the interdependence of all people, but that we actively seek to honor it in all of our actions, because our sacred moral purpose depends on it. This universalism does not mean that we condone every behavior or allow oppression and injustice to remain. Our mindfulness of God, the divine source, our moral purpose, it does not deny that people can and do terrible acts that must be stopped. But it does us, no good to let our minds run wild with assumptions of who those people might be. It does us no good to cut off any possibility of relationship with people based on who we think they are or based on our belief that they are different. It goes against our universalist values, our purpose as people of faith, to attempt to create a world without striving to draw upon the inherent worth and love of every person. This weekend, I've had the privilege of attending the Leading Edge Conference in New York, a racial justice conference that brings together religious leaders from multiple traditions. Anurag Gupta, the founder of Be More America, spoke about the shape our society has taken and the way that we can change it. He observed that we are living with and seeing our ideas of each other rather than being in each other's presence. We have given in to the temptation to protect ourselves because it is so much easier than really coming to know one another. And that's how that cycle of oppression works. It keeps us from engaging in those difficult conversations. But we can break the cycle. We can choose to love and know one another, not by accepting the actions that are harmful, but by challenging the people who perform them to live into that innate goodness we know they have. We can strive to find new ways of relating to them that do not condone injustice, but honor the humanity and loving capacities of the people whose behaviors have oppressed others. We do not give up, assume, and separate. Our sense of universal justice calls us to reach out in new ways, knowing that they will be difficult and demanding, but we are strengthened by a faith in the goodness and worth of all whom we encounter, by our connection and commitment to a greater purpose beyond our individual selves. People, we made you into races and tribes so that you should get to know one another. These words are so much more meaningful in their literary context, a context that shows why such an explanation is necessary. Our human potential to connect is so much more important when we combine it with the instruction to avoid that cultural temptation to assume and separate, to distance ourselves from one another. The Quran's command to be mindful of God, of source, of purpose with our being, our universal directive to live into our ability to understand rather than to assume, our multi-faith capacity to know those who are different from ourselves, they bring necessary healing to our lives. Our embodied mindfulness of a purpose beyond ourselves, a source through which all our lives are created and sustained, it helps us to develop new relationships and understandings that maybe, just maybe, will give us the healthier fuel we not only want, but need to propel us towards universal justice. May it be so.